Hello and welcome to The Cine Skinny. It's the podcast from the team behind The Skinny magazine. It's Jamie Dunn here. I'm sitting in for Peter Simpson, who's off today because it's his birthday. So happy birthday, Peter.
Happy birthday, Peter.
I believe he's gone to Newcastle, is that right? To eat some fish?
Yeah, I don't know.
Which seems like, is Newcastle famous for its fish?
I mean,
don't
it
know.
sounds like a Peter thing to do.
Yeah. So, I mean, the fish market's right here. I don't understand why he's had to leave the city. But anyway, he's a foodie. You know, he's going to travel for his food. And we're also down another pod stalwart because Anahit is currently at the London Film Festival. Although we'll be getting a little audio missive from Anahit later in the show. Look out for that. But never fear, Ellie Robertson is here. Ellie, how's it going?
It's going well. Yeah, I'm excited. We've got a lot to talk about today.
We do. And we have some help because we have a little cameo from our colleague Emily Roberts. Emily, I just realised you guys have almost the same name. I didn't actually realise this.
Initials.
Yeah, we're like name cousins.
Yeah, it's
you
very
pointed
close.
this out a while back.
Yeah,
It's
quite
fun.
exciting.
It's nice. Yeah.
That's cool. How are you doing, Emily?
I'm doing very well, thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for saving the podcast at the very last minute. So we're recording this episode, as you can probably tell, it's a bit echoey. We're recording it at Skinny's HQ in a little dingy office room. But you should still just listen to our pals at EHFM. You know, we love those guys. The radio station is truly great. There's tons of great shows. Please have a listen. But before we kick off, we just want to say thank you to people who came along to the fall in their dozens, which sounds bad, but we only have like 80 seats. So coming along your dozens is great. Yeah, that film went down really well. And I'm excited to say that we will be back in November with the Cine Skinny Film Club. And I can reveal today on the podcast that it's going to be Andrea Arnold's new film Bird, which stars a few of our faves. Barry Keoghan and Franz Rosowski are two of our favourites. They come up a lot in the pod, and I'm sure that film is going to be one we're going to cover down the line. So those tickets for that film, Bird, is on sale now at theskinny.co.uk/tickets. Please come along. It's going to be really cool. So before we kick off on today's show, what's everyone been watching, guys? What are you watching?
Well, I had a nice 5-6 hour plane journey this week, which meant you get to do the most exciting thing about being on a plane, which is watch movies. So I caught up on The Iron Claw, which I never saw when it came out. So I was excited to see that. Although, I mean, I enjoyed it because it was about sad siblings, which is like my favourite genre of film. That's why I love Succession so much. I just want to see like people's siblings being upset, which is, the whole film, right? But I mean, it was very predictable in many ways, though. I think that's probably all biopics, right?
There was that one with Mickey Rourke, right? Where he was a wrestler.
The wrestler.
Yeah.
The wrestler, that makes sense.
I never saw Iron Claw, but it does seem like there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah, and like it's a really tragic story because it's about, all these siblings and, spoiler, I mean, it's a real family. They all die. And I think when something's like that heavy and that much tragedy, it's very hard to fit that in a film and give like each person the weight and things that they deserved. But I enjoyed it. I thought Zac Efron was unreal. I can't believe he got like no like shout.
Yeah, that film was completely overlooked by the Oscars, wasn't it?
It's insane. But yeah, I mean, it did make me cry, but then again, I was very tired and on a plane. So
Yeah, there's something about being on a plane, the kind of lack of it's the
oxygen levels are low.
There's something going on. You're more emotional. You're more vulnerable to like soppy stories.
My most egregious film that I watched on a plane, and for the first time on a plane, was Parasite.
Oh my God.
Which was just a lot.
Yeah.
Like, a lot because it was like a really, really magnificent film that you're really getting wrapped up in, but you're also like sat between two people, but also at parts terrifying and like heart-wrenching.
You're jumping in your seat next to strangers.
So yeah, there's some films that are best watched on planes, and I don't think Parasite's one of them.
I think my favourite part of films on planes is going to the loo at the back and then walking forward and seeing what everybody's watching, just having a good nosy. And like, I noticed when I was in a plane recently going to America, and everybody was watching Braveheart. Like all the people who've been...
The guy next to me was watching Braveheart as well.
It's like, I've been in Scotland. I might as well just continue the trip of being in Scotland by watching Braveheart. I also love when people watch like quite naughty movies, like people were watching Challengers.
Yeah, okay, this was... Because Challengers was one of the options, and I've already seen Challengers twice, but I mean, I loved it so much, and I was like, do I watch Challengers on the plane? And then I was sitting beside an old man. I was like, I don't want to watch that three-way make-out scene next to this old man and my mother, who was on the other side.
Yeah, there was a woman who was like, she was rewinding scenes. Who's in front of me? She was watching.
Oh my God, Queen.
She definitely rewound the makeout scene. I mean, good on her, you know.
You know what I mean? No shame.
But you know, there's like I mean, I don't know. I'm all for it, but like there was like kids kicking around, and there's a lot of nudity and challenges. But anyway, that's off topic. I just enjoy seeing what people are watching.
Oh yeah, being nosy is the best pastime.
Clueless seems to be very, very popular. I noticed lots of people watching Clueless on my plane. Like there's all these new films, but people just like watching Mean Girls and things like that.
Yeah, I try and reserve like plane time to watch things that I just didn't catch the first time.
Yes.
Like even though you are like you see all the options, you're like, oh my God, my favorite films are here, but it's like, this is the time you can use. No one's going to disturb
I'd be more bored if I was watching a film I'd already seen.
Yeah,
because it's again just like a slightly more difficult experience to get wrapped up in it on a plane. So it's like I wouldn't be paying attention. Exactly. If it's a new film, you're kind of like, oh, I didn't have the chance to see this. It's
not the most ideal situation because you've also got those terrible earphones they give you. And you've got the roar of the jet, obviously.
And then sometimes the pilot comes on the intercom.
Yeah, and it's like pauses.
Oh, an emergency landing, and I'm like, I'm watching a film.
Ellie, what are you watching?
Yes.
Something not on a plane?
No, not on a plane. I brought this up a couple episodes ago that I'd started Our Friends in the North, which I've only just finished, which is the sort of like 9-part historical epic political thriller set in Newcastle with Christopher Eccleston, Mark Strong, Daniel Craig, and Gina McKee. What an absolute trip. It's one of those things where it's like, you know, I love it because even though the play that it's based on came out in the 80s, they couldn't make a TV version because it's so damning of like the British government that in the 1980s, they weren't all for it. And then like, unfortunately, when you get up to the last episode, which is I think 1995, it is sort of like, I don't know, I guess the years start coming and they don't stop coming. Like it's like, it does sort of leave you really, really hanging with this sort of like open ending of like you never really know what's going to wind up happening to Daniel Craig, who's just sort of a vagrant by the end of it. Have you ever seen Always Sunny in Philadelphia, the character of Rickety Cricket, where each time he shows up he just looks more and more desiccated? This is Daniel Craig in Our Friends in the North. It's an unbelievable breakout role for him, and it's kind of unbelievable as well that he sort of wound up becoming James Bond, because like in this he plays such a sort of like inelegant character. He's so sort of like rough and slightly pathetic, and yeah, just cutting around with his like long 1970s hair and his like big glasses. But Christopher Eccleston, I have also said on this podcast that Christopher Eccleston's hottest role is Shallow Grave, where he plays a little bookish accountant nerdy boy who then turns into like a full-on like attic dwelling psycho. He's a lot hotter in Our Friends in the North, almost because like it is kind of a really strong reflection of Eccleston's like values. Like it was a role that he really got into and really like got under, and it's a very socialist role. His character at one point like campaigns as a Labour MP or whatever. He does eventually like take a big nosedive in the late 80s to early 90s, like all the characters do, like everything does really. But it's just a pretty amusing watch. It's a pretty like fun little time capsule, and is only like marginally depressing. So
that's a recommendation.
Yeah. What have you been watching?
I have been watching a load of films from LFF. Talk about people who don't have to leave. Anahit, you don't have to leave Scotland to go to London Film Festival. London Film Festival comes to you now. So I was going on to Glasgow Film Festival to see a few London Film Festival films. I saw Blitz, the Steve McQueen film. I saw Conclave, which was like a kind of like a papal thriller with like tons of stars.
Is this the one with like, it's got like John Lithgow?
Isn't
it Stanley Tucci in it?
Tucci's in it. Everyone's in it.
So good. And they're all cardinals.
Isabella Rossellini.
So nice.
Ralph Fiennes.
I forgot Stanley Tucci is an actor. I was like, the pasta man?
Exactly. And he's quite good in it. And then I saw Aurora as well, which is not Aurora, Anora, which is the new Sean Baker one. All pretty good. I would say Blitz was an up and down film. It's definitely like a British war movie, right? So it gives you everything you expect from a British war movie, but it's also directed by Steve McQueen, so it's completely undercutting that as well. So it's quite refreshing because it's a film about the Blitz that basically says we were not all in it together. You know, like this idea of the London spirit during the Blitz, he claims is bullshit, which I kind of probably agree is probably true. So he's saying essentially everyone was out for themselves. You know, the BBC was corrupt. The police obviously corrupt. The underground station people who were little Jobsworth who wouldn't let people into the underground without a ticket because even when the bombs are falling, you know, so it's really critical of the whole country essentially, and then said that racism was rife, you know, even though the irony were fighting fascists, there was still plenty of fascists kicking around in London, you know, in these shelters. So at moments you think it's a kid's film, it's centered on a kid, and it's him sort of like essentially lost in London during the Blitz. And it's got this kind of kid feel, you know, him riding around on rail tracks with his pals, but then suddenly one of the kids will die. It's actually got tons of like tonal shifts, and it feels to me like a film that's maybe being cut up a lot in the edit. It feels like maybe there was a longer film at some point. For example, Harris Dickinson is in the film, but he's like barely in it. He's the third cast listed, but he's actually got no role. His role is like clearly been reduced at some point. So there's something went on in the film, but despite that, I found it actually quite a rousing, interesting movie. I thought Conclave was fine. It was like it's gonna. The one thing about Conclave, it's going to really stir up discourse because it has a wild ending, which I don't want to spoil. And I really, if you're interested in the film, do not read anything about it because the ending is wild. I kind of like the ending, but I think some people will have issues with it. And then Anora, again, is like it's a tonally really interesting film. It's essentially a comedy. It's like a Cinderella story, but it's also like a Safdie Brothers movie. It's got that kind of energy. This kind of like it starts off as this kind of love story, then it becomes a kind of like One Night of the Soul type thing where they're running around New York. And then it has the most heartbreaking ending that really kind of slapped me in the face, and it makes you rethink the whole film that you've been giggling at and like enjoying and finding kind of uplifting. So again, Sean Baker really on top form. I can see why it won like the Palme d'Or, and it's a film I think it'd be fun to talk about on the podcast in future as well. Yeah. So Anahit is probably going to talk about those films as well in more elegant terms, but that's Anahit. Talking of that, should we actually go to Anahit? Should we?
Yeah, let's go to London.
Let's dial up.
Yeah.
Do the little.
Hello, friends from Edinburgh, because I am now back in Edinburgh. I forgot to record this in London, so you got this here. But I'm going to do like a little London Film Festival report anyway, despite the fact I am in my house tidying. I had such a great time. So delighted to report. Films are back. Venice Film Festival tried to kill them, but they're back. They survived. It was so great. I saw like 16 things. I would say 2 of them I was a bit like, oh, okay, but I still kind of enjoyed them. And almost everything else was from like really quite liking to thinking were excellent, which was fucking great. So I'm gonna talk about a few of them. And I am stalling because I'm trying to get to my laptop so I can find my letterbox so I can remember what I watched. But first of all, I think my favourite thing was Ramal Ross's Nickel Boys, which is based on the Colson Whitehead novel. And it tells the story of 2 boys that in the late 50s, early 60s, I think, who were sent to a reform school, 2 young black boys sent to a reform school in Florida, which is based kind of on a true story on a reform school that actually existed, which is just horrific. And it kind of traces their journey, but it is this absolutely incredible poetic film that makes wild use of archival footage. And it's really about not just about history, but also how we record history, how we can make, draw on or discover or create a black archive, how film and photography and recording work to, whether they can work to speak to the black experience, how they can speak, it's so layered and incredible. The director, Ramal Ross, it's his first narrative feature, but he did a documentary a few years ago, which I think either came out in the pandemic or I watched it at the very beginning of the pandemic, but it was around that time, called Hale County This Morning, This Evening. And so this has a little bit of a documentary sensibility, but it's also incredible because it's shot entirely from the point of view of the 2 boys. So you see everything, when their eyes move, that's the camera moving. And so there's this kind of subjective, so you only see them when they're looking at each other, if that makes sense. So yeah, that was absolutely incredible. Sean Baker's Honora. So we talked about Sean Baker on the podcast before. He did Red Rocket, as well as older films like Tangerine and The Florida Project. His new film, Honora, I think is kind of his, not breakout film, but I think it's the first that's really getting like proper Oscar buzz. It is so fun. My friend described it as a screwball comedy, and it kind of is, but it still has his absolutely like anarchic, slightly grimy sensibility. And it's about an erotic dancer played incredibly by Mikey Madison, who basically gets like pretty womaned by the son of a Russian oligarch who is this like Timothy Chalamet ass like kid, and then his parents don't approve and it just like chaos ensues. And that was so fun. Mohammad Rasulov's The Seed of the Sacred Fig was incredible. It follows like a family and is set in the immediate aftermath of the uprisings that happened after the state murder of Mahsa Amini. It's really interesting actually, because I was talking to friends who had seen it at Cannes, and apparently at Cannes her name wasn't explicitly mentioned, but in this cut of the film it is. So it's really situated in a very recent and heavy history, but it's looking at this family, the father of whom is part of Iran's revolutionary court, which is basically the state. Like that's who decides that people get executed. And the kind of violence of the state starts to permeate into the family with his wife and 2 daughters. It's so clever. I saw All We Imagine Is Light. That was great. That was a big film out of Cannes. Like really beautiful, moving depiction of 2 women working in a hospital in Mumbai. To a Land Unknown is this incredible, really harrowing Palestinian film about these 2 cousins in Greece who are basically they've like made half the refugee journey and now they're trying to get further into Europe, and it's so upsetting but really good. Universal Language, which was one of my favorite things I saw, and is almost impossible to describe, but it takes place in a Canada where everything is said in Farsi and written in Farsi, and it's this like collapsing together of, it kind of looks like 1970s Tehran, but it's Winnipeg. And I think like it has this incredible like Wes Anderson-y aesthetic, and it's like this kind of exploring how like cultural divides happen, but also how these are like constructed things and there is this kind of universal humanity that links people, but it just also just has like the Tim Hortons sign written in Farsi, which like made me cry. So I don't know, it's really a strange film. I'm really excited for us to talk about it properly. But yeah, that was really good. I saw Mati Diop's new film, Dahomey, which I think was reviewed in the most recent edition of The Skinny, and is about the restitution of artifacts from France to Benin. And so it's a documentary, but the artifacts have a voice, like they have a voiceover narrative, which is really cool. I saw a film called Grand Theft Hamlet, which was about a documentary about a group of actors staging Hamlet in the Grand Theft Auto universe. So the entire thing is Grand Theft Auto, which was crazy. That was so crazy. What else? Yeah, just loads of really good things. Felt really excited about film, which is crazy. Can you imagine? So yeah, I had a great time. I'm excited for us to talk about these films. Oh, this is so fucking long. Okay, all right. Hopefully Jamie can edit this. Okay, thank you. Goodbye.
That was a little visit to London there.
Thank you, Anahit.
I can smell the kind of like the Thames,
the smog, the Great London smog.
Yeah, the what did they down there? The pie mash and the jelly deals. It was like so evocative. Thank you for that. So we're now going to discuss a film that's been much discussed, Megalopolis. It's Francis Ford Coppola's epic dream project, which he's been trying to get off the ground for 4 decades, in which he plunged $120 million of his own money into. I believe he sold off part of his vineyard or something.
Yeah.
Okay. Good on you, Francis. So the film imagines modern America as the city of New Rome. Adam Driver stars as Caesar Catalina, who's this visionary artist who plans to rebuild the city, turning it into this futuristic utopia. But he has opposition from a corrupt mayor, played by Giancarlo. He wants to keep the status quo. In the middle of this is Julia, the mayor's daughter, who is in love with Caesar. Julia is played by Hollyoaks and Game of Thrones alumni Natalie Emmanuel. Maybe we can talk about the soap opera acting during your chat. So there's a lot going on in this film because there's also features loads of other people like Andre Plaza, Sheila Buff, John Voight, loads of other people who have been gotten into trouble with, for various things. Jason Schwartzman, so it's like, yeah, you've got like Audrey Plaza, you've got basically like all the people who've been cancelled because they're awful. Then you've got all the family. You've got Jason Schwartzman, you've got Talia Shire, and then you've got Lawrence Fishburne, who's, I believe, playing a chauffeur, a mystic chauffeur.
Narrator.
Yeah, he's the narrator for some reason.
Anyway, if that all sounds fuzzy, it's because I haven't actually seen this film, but Ellie and Emily are going to fill us in. The reviews of this have been all over the place. I would love to know what you guys think. So maybe, Emily, we can start with you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very complicated question because as someone said on Twitter, it is to discuss this film and ask whether it was good or bad is just dissolves into arguments about what the terms good and bad even mean. I mean, even your description of the film, which is correct about it being about the city of New Rome, sometimes it's a city, sometimes it's a country. Is it America? We don't know. And that's kind of this film. Things are explained to you and then contradicted later and then never picked up again. It's incredible, which is the only word I can use to describe this film, and not particularly in the good way of incredible. It's just incredible that it exists, I think. The first thing I think is that I think it's such a shame how quickly things leave cinemas, because I think this film needs to be seen with other people around you to also like share those incredulous laughs where you're like, am I supposed to be laughing at this? What is happening? Are we all seeing the same thing? Which I think is just so nice to have with other people in the cinema. But I think what I really enjoyed about this film is that it's not cynical. I think this is like the key to it, is it's insane and it's not good, but you can tell that this was a passion project and there's just zero cynicism in it. And I think after like a diet of Marvel movies where they're winking to the camera constantly and we're all kind of like in on a joke, it's like, this film is earnest. This film is not self-aware, you know, in like a nice way, which I think was like really refreshing to just see someone really go through with this idea that he's been making this film for what, like trying to make it for like 40 years, and he's gone through with it, and you kind of got to give him a round of applause for that, I feel. No matter how bad it actually is.
I think that I totally agree. It is, I said to you earlier, like, we have a big what the fuck film every couple of years, and a couple of years ago it was Cats 2019, and now it's this, but there is kind of a hard line where what was kind of so WTF about Cats is it was like a big sort of audience-facing studio production where you were just thinking, like, how can this many people devote all of the money and time and collaborative effort to make a film when they had no idea during that so many people would not want to see this, right? But that's not like that. This isn't like the malpractice of a large studio. This is all Coppola, baby.
Exactly.
It's sort of like, it becomes like a little bit more embarrassing every single thing that you learn about this film. That it took him like 40 years to write. That he sold his vineyard or whatever to pay for it himself. That like, I think that there were something like 5 different art directors because they would either quit or be fired, because Coppola has this unbelievable like improvisational style of filmmaking where he would just gather up the entire crew and be like, right, we're going to the beach today, let's film some stuff on the beach. But it's like the art director saying, like, but you want me to design this giant city or whatever, like you can't just improvise that sort of stuff. This hugely
conceptual film.
Yeah, and then like
it doesn't improvise.
It translates to really weird stuff. Aubrey Plaza's character is called Wow Platinum. Adam Driver has the power to stop time, but his catchphrase to do so is time stop. He does it 3 times. It never is used.
It doesn't have anything to do with the plot.
Yeah.
They just kind of like show you that he has this power. And I don't think anyone else in the film has magical powers either. So I don't know if in the world of the film...
The only thing he actually stops, it's always because he's stood on a roof looking out like Batman. So he shouts time stop and then the clouds stop.
And he just sort of looks at the city stopped and then he just really
like, it's so bizarre. You might think that it's it's like old man yells at cloud. But you're totally right, Emily. There's no cynicism at all. It's actually like a very sort of like triumphant thing. Whereas I feel like we use old man yells at cloud when it's like someone's confused and angry invective against wokeism or whatever. But this isn't like that. This is about like the tale of one man who is a genius, kind of in an Ayn Rand sort of way, like this one great historical genius who can save the world, but he's stopped by reasons that Coppola doesn't really understand. Like, Coppola thinks that the only reason that a politician would stand in the way of an architect who wants to remodel an entire city is that, oh, well, the politician's corrupt or whatever. And there's like people in the streets protesting because it's like, yeah, people would protest if some rich guy they'd never met was going to level their homes and like create a brand new thing. But like, oh, they're just depicted as like not sharing his vision or something like that. Like, Coppola doesn't really seem to understand why geniuses aren't just allowed to completely rebuild the world in their own image or whatever. But hopefully after sinking all of his money and getting all of these incredibly high caliber actors around for this film that is being kind of panned, he maybe understands a little bit better that you can't just do what you want and that's always good.
I think it's kind of incredible as well that like the film is about this one guy who wants to create this like beautiful thing just so it exists.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, you know, that's the whole thing. He just wants to make this beautiful city that's going to be a utopia for everyone and be this gorgeous thing, and that people are standing in his way. And then the film itself has kind of become this thing that in and of itself where he just wants to make this thing because he thinks it's cool. Essentially, it's just him being like, I want to make this film. It's cool.
It's a one-to-one allegory about Coppola's ego as an auteur, and he doesn't even really realize
exactly because he's 84 years old.
It's so desperate to invoke kind of great art, and that is so debilitating. That's part of why, like, you know, the editing is really busted, and the sort of, because of all these art director switches, like, it looks very ugly, like, it looks very artificial, somewhat like artificially intelligent generated, probably not, but like it is just that very kind of like, it looks like a desktop background, like,
oh yeah,
but like when they actually like speak, nothing that they say makes any sense. So right before Adam Driver is going to meet Natalie Emmanuel, his butler is like, oh, she's not going to meet your expectations. It's like, oh, my great expectations? No. And you've just said the name of a famous book. Like, this is not how good dialogue works. Hey, do you want some grapes? Grapes of Wrath? No. Like,
it's so brilliant in that scene where they meet each other for the first time. Adam Driver just really dramatically takes his coat off and then instantly puts on another coat. Like, the film is just full of these like bizarre little things where you're like, why did you make that choice? And how did that like end up in the final edit of this film?
The first thing that he says, the first lines that he has is that he does, other than time stop, is that he does the to be or not to be speech from Shakespeare.
The entire speech.
And just in front of this like press conference, who are taking pictures of his model of Megalopolis or whatever, and halfway through he interrupts himself to say, stop taking pictures of that, thank you. But they're still taking pictures. It's just so, like, there must have been, I don't know, like, you're right, it either is like Coppola having some weird, bizarre comedic irony, some self-awareness where like each scene kind of just immediately contradicts and undermines itself, or there has been a like cataclysmic breakdown in communications between the editing department and like the art department, and he apparently encouraged actors to write their own lines.
That shows. Yeah.
Because no one says anything that makes sense. At one point, Aubrey Plaza and Adam Driver are like holding each other, and she's like, I want to be half of a power couple. And he sort of says quite dramatically, which half? And it's like, but that doesn't mean anything, though. You're just saying things that don't mean anything.
She has an absolutely incredible line as well, where she's like, oh, I'm not anal, but I am oral, and then just gets down on her knees in front of him. And it's just like, that is played seriously. Like, Adam Driver does not laugh after this or anything. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
But I think what I really genuinely enjoyed about the experience of watching this film was it's been so long that every single scene in this film, like, I was never expecting what was coming next. Mm-hmm. Not once did something happen and I was like, yeah, that makes sense for what I just saw. Which is just like, an incredible viewing experience.
You're right. Like in that whole thing of like, is it good? Is it bad? Well, obviously people have vastly different ideas about what those words mean, but at the very least, like it is entertaining.
Exactly.
Dumpster fires are fun.
Also, it's the first film. I mean, we've got Jon Voight and Dustin Hoffman in a film together for the first time since Midnight Cowboy, and it's this. And a new actor will pop up every time, and you're like, they're in this?
Yeah.
How he
I
got all
went
these
in
people?
looking it up and was still surprised every time I saw someone show up. It's so good.
I mean, it's got 900 plots. None of them are ever picked up again or satisfyingly concluded. It's amazing.
Now, I haven't seen this film, but I do wonder if... Because I think people have got Coppola wrong. You know, he's been vindicated so many times. Like, he obviously had that kind of story career in the 70s where, you know, he'd been masterpiece after masterpiece. And then he makes Apocalypse Now, has his heart attack, and he goes off the rails. And, he makes One from the Heart, which basically sunk his company. You know, he makes teen movies, weird stuff. He makes Bram Stoker's Dracula. But all these films have come back, actually, and been sort of reappraised, even though they were kind of critically panned at the time. They have sort of found audiences. So can you imagine, you know, people finding something worthwhile in this in like 10 years time, 20 years time?
I kind of feel like this film could be like The Room, where people watch it together just to kind of laugh at it, because like so much of the dialogue is delivered exactly like The Room, like where there's just no space between like responses and stuff, and people kind of almost talk over each other, and then it's like it's so The Room coded. I just feel like it would be a fun experience.
In that way that The Room was kind of a really like small, incredibly no budget production, this is like, what if that intense Tommy Wiseau style auteurship of The Room just had a much grander budget and sort of existed at this time in which a lot of the cinema we see is heavily like CGI and action driven. So I don't know, maybe you're right. Maybe there will be somewhat of a legacy of like, this is, you know, like if Marvel did The Room.
Right? I'll hold a yearly Megalopolis viewing.
Oh my God, that's
Everyone has to
incredible.
dress up as Caesar Catalina.
Well, I mean, to be honest, you've made me want to watch it. It doesn't sound boring. A film though where you don't know where it's going is like so satisfying to me, because I feel like so many films are so like formulaic.
Exactly.
You know exactly where they're going to end up, and this sounds like not that. So
Off the rails.
I mean, it sounds like letterbox scores might be pointless for this film. I love actually looking at the letterbox scores on this, because it's just like a block. Like there's so many like 5 stars, so many 1 stars, and everything in between. So I want to know what you guys think. What would you rate it out of 5?
I actually just didn't rate it because I was like, this is beyond stars. Because how do you rate something that you enjoyed the experience of watching so much, but you also know it's absolute visual dog shit and like terrible? So I just liked it.
I don't know what I would say to give it a letterbox rating. I would maybe say a 1 because it's that bad of a film, but this is 1 good star. Yeah. Like this is a good star.
I'm surprised it looks so bad, because like he has spent a fair amount of money on it. Like, why does it look bad? Is it?
I thought like there was a few parts at the start that didn't look terrible, but I think, as I've said before, I think it was because somebody was trying to make Blade Runner from memory, but all they could remember was the rain and that it's dark. Because like the start of it, you're kind of like, okay, it's kind of moody, this is kind of interesting, and then it just falls apart.
Yeah, I guess what you're describing is actually more of a $300 million movie, but you had 100 million. So actually, but that probably wouldn't like look as epic as he's trying to make it, you know. But then all his recent films have been like little indie. Like, have you seen any of his more recent films, like Twix, his little horror film, or Testro? Like, I really like his recent run of like weird little low budget stuff. So
I feel like you would like this.
Yeah.
I feel like you would enjoy this.
Okay.
I say like I said to you earlier, like I went to go see quite an early screening, and I think now that if you were to go see it in cinemas, it would be quite dead. Everyone who like
The 5 people that wanted to see it.
the casual audience is like not really biting this one, but like when I went, it was quite early in the morning, so there were not a lot of people in the auditorium, but like you would just get scattered laughter throughout the most like intense dramatic scenes. So it clearly is like, I don't know, like it is amusing. It is a very tickling film.
he is also famous for like just re-editing his films, you know, like so like Apocalypse Now he's redone about 5 times. Like The Godfather Part 3 he redid and made it I think a better film. So he might come back to this and
Yeah, a director's cut of Megalopolis.
Yeah.
It's 10 hours long.
How long? I
It was like 3 hours.
I had no sense of time. I genuinely couldn't have told you if it was a short film or a long
honestly,
film.
I thought time flied in that cinema.
Time stop.
Time stop.
So I think that was an average of a 1. If I'm using my maths correctly.
I think that this is a 1-star film, but for people who love 1-star films, you've got to see this.
Okay, well, if that doesn't entice you, I don't know what does. It's actually still in cinemas. It's on very weird times. That's why I couldn't say it. It's basically shown at lunchtime. So if you have flexible working hours or have a day off, I would recommend going and see this. I'm going to try and see it, and let us know what you think. So Emily, before you slink off, just thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It was very fun.
You should
I like
come
being a
back on
substitute.
soon.
Yeah.
We should get you on for a good film.
Yeah. Listen, I'm Team Megalopolis.
Or maybe you could be the one. You can always come on when we've got an absolute stinker and nobody else wants to see it.
Brilliant. I love being a hater, so yeah, definitely.
Okay, next up, we're going to talk about 2 better films. I think we can agree. So that is Matty Diop's Dahomey and Mark Cousins' A Sudden Glimpse to Deeper Things. And the reason we're pairing these is that actually they're 2 films with very much in common, I think. So they're both films about art. They're both documentaries that are very experimental in their form. And they both won major prizes at European film festivals. So Dahomey, it won the Golden Bear at Berlin Film Festival, and A Sudden Glimpse to Deeper Things won the Karlovy Vary Film Festival, which I think is quite unusual because docs don't usually get the top prizes at film festivals. I mean, it seems to me anyway, to see 2 docs top is kind of unusual. So yeah, let's start with Diop's film Dahomey. This film opens in November 2021, and the French government is repatriating 26 royal treasures that their colonial army plundered from the kingdom of Dahomey in the late 19th century. We follow the objects as they are packed up and returned to their homeland, which is now part of present-day Benin. The film initially seems quite simple, just a procedural following this process of repatriation. But it becomes clear there's a lot more going on when one of these objects, number 26, which is a wooden statue of King Gizo, begins to tell us the story of his life in voiceover. And the film climaxes in a huge debate at university with students talking about the rights and wrongs of this homecoming. So it's a film that's not your standard documentary. I think it's like a kind of hybrid. It's doing lots of things. There's lots of kind of sci-fi elements, sort of fictional elements in here. Ellie, what did you make of this one?
Well, I think you're totally right. I think both of these documentaries are quite experimental, and they're sort of experimental in the way that you get the sense that the documentarian is going on this sort of journey with you. Like, they do not necessarily know what kind of film they're going to wind up making. And you definitely feel that with Dahomey. It feels very specific to this moment in history. It is covering the moment that these artifacts are repatriated to the country of Benin from France, I think. And yeah, like, it feels like Matty Diop, the documentarian, is sort of trying to uncover the meaning of this moment and sort of, you know, ready to pounce on anything that might be captured by the camera. So it's not like, you're right, it's not like a sort of National Geographic documentary where you've got these talking head experts giving all the information about all the different artifacts. And the reason for that is probably because those experts would come from the Western institutions, or the predominantly white institutions that have been hoarding these for hundreds of years. But instead, it encourages you to sort of imagine the significance of this exchange through that monologue, through that sort of narration that the artifact itself gives, through it telling its own stories. And it is these sort of like beautifully written little soliloquies about, you know, the feeling of coming home or the uncertainty of the future. And that really like gives the film its style. It gives it a great sense of atmosphere. When we do actually see the artifacts sort of unboxed from their crates, you get like the museum employees reading out their dimensions and specifications and their conditions of it in very kind of like neutral official words, not emotional at all, but still that camera is like going real close on these people's faces, just, you know, catching a glimpse of an employee sort of staring at the statue sort of wordlessly after they've set it up, and you never really quite know the emotions that are going through, but you get a sense of like real magnitude because they're just, I don't know, it's like handling them so sort of officially does distance the people from the artifacts, but you know there's something more to it. And then the best part of the film is this big debate in the end where you actually get people verbalizing how they feel about it. Like this, it's like a university lecture hall with students debating whether or not this is a triumph for the Beninese government to have like recovered these items, or if it's an insult because out of the thousands that have been plundered, they've only recovered 26. So, you know, I loved that part of the film, and I kind of almost wish that there was sort of more like that, because I think that it's got the quality, but maybe a bit more quantity, because it is quite a short film, and you only feel like you're just beginning to settle into the sort of buzz around this event. But yeah, like you definitely get the sense that there is a lot of factions at play. There's a lot of ceremony. There's a lot of like very specific ways in which they're being handled and delivered. And then you've got government officials coming through, and you can see the students themselves kind of, you know, dealing it with it in their own way. And it feels like it's making a huge impact, but that impact, we don't really know. Like Diop is kind of looking for what will be significant about this. And yeah, like it just winds up being like a really interesting film in which you learn a lot about a place that I don't really know much about. And it also has this like great style to it.
Yeah, it's weird. I actually didn't know much about Dahomey at all either until a couple of years ago, because this is the place where, I don't know if you saw The Women King, which was the big blockbuster, where Viola Davis leads this kind of Amazon army. So this is like, Dahomey was actually a kind of like a very powerful kingdom, you know, with this amazing army who kind of dominated all their neighbours. And and that's one interesting thing in the film. Like, these people have had their kind of like quite a rich history taken from them, but actually the history is actually quite dark as well, because some of the objects hint to that. Like there's a object which is like it's like carved out of wood, and it shows the king on his throne, and he's surrounded by his kind of Amazon women army. But then below him, holding up the throne, is like slaves, because this is one of the dark parts of Dahomey's history. Is like, what they would do is when they captured their enemies, they would actually give them to the colonialists, and they would go off and like be sold as part of the slave trade. So it's like, so it's like got a really dark history, but also a really kind of like rich and kind of history of being like a kind of very culturally rich society. But yeah, so like I was impressed how much was squeezed into this 98 minutes. It's really an interesting like length of time actually, because it's a bit too long to be like an hour like TV slot, like, because I don't actually know what it was made for. It seems like slightly too long to be a TV documentary, you know, which usually run about an hour or 45 minutes to fit in the kind of TV schedule. But it's a bit too short to be a feature, which is usually kind of 90 minutes to 100 minutes, which fits perfectly in a kind of cinema sort of sphere. So, I do agree, like, filmmakers just make the film that feels right and the length that feels right. And clearly this 98 minutes just felt right for Diop, and it just breezes by but there is so much in that 98 minutes. I feel like it's a film that doesn't feel rushed, it doesn't feel crammed with stuff, because it actually takes its time. Like when we watch people boxing up these objects, these kind of treasures, it's very kind of leisurely. You know, we see them sort of, you know, tying lovely tying little notes and bows around the statue so it doesn't get scratched. And there's that interesting bit where it's arrived back in its homeland, and they're examining it, and they're saying things like, actually, which I think might be quite interesting. I'm wondering how much of this is scripted. So they're saying things like the objects are not in perfect condition, because I think that's one of the colonialist arguments, isn't it? Like the colonialists always argue that the reason, you know, that, like, I think it was Boris Johnson who said we can't give the Elgin marbles back to Greece because we've taken much better care of it. You know, like that's the reason why we take all these objects from like Egypt or Africa, is because we can care for it better in our perfect museums. But that's obviously a lie, because like they're saying actually these objects aren't in perfect condition. Yeah, you know?
and indeed in many of the sort of countries that they accuse of having like unstable you know, peace times, or they're like prone to breaking out in war or something like that. Oh, that's not safe for the artifacts. Whereas, of course, a lot of the violence that we see in colonized countries is the responsibility of the colonizer.
Exactly. So the film is like I think it's very smart in the way it introduces that idea just while it's just observing, you know, the packing and unpacking of these objects and the people arriving for the grand opening. And we see people like, I presume they're building the actual museum as well. You see people just painting the museum because I presume it's been built specifically to house these 26 objects, which initially sounds like a really cool thing, but then the debate happens, and actually you realise that this has stirred up quite a lot of debate. And the debate is also quite ambiguous. Like, is this a real debate? Is this just Mata Diop going along to see students debate, or has she kind of like created this atmosphere? Because it suggests that this has been broadcast across the radio. You see like lots of scenes of people on their wireless listening to the debate, and would this debate be spread across the country? Maybe it is. Maybe it's like it is like really a big news back in.
It gave me the kind of like, it invoked in me, at least the only thing that I could think from my own experiences that was kind of a similar point in history was like the lead up to the Scottish independence referendum, where like it really did feel like something, like a discussion that belonged to everybody, and everybody was entitled and welcomed to kind of share. And you can see that if you look back on like Under the Skin, where you get the little radio announcements of like the independence referendum coming up, and that sort of like, as it plays over, we see all the different people going about their day in Glasgow and stuff like that. And it feels sort of like a similar level of capturing a moment here, in like how, you know, this could be something of huge significance. It's almost like we're on the brink of some huge development in the history of Benin, but also at the same time, like there's complicated feelings around it, and everybody can be kind of divisive over it. So it really is like a kind of wonderful, especially someone who's like, you know, it's a part of the world that I don't know a lot about and I'd love to learn more. So it's like, that's one of the really strong points of the documentary, is that it gives you a sort of window into this world, and it does sort of remind you that people are very divided here, and people have their own feelings, and there's a lot of individualism as well as like an idea of nationhood.
Yeah, and it's not like didactic in that way, because like I say, the initial part of the film is actually just observational. You know, we don't really have any, you know, there's not as if the French are like seen as sinister when they're giving these back, or you know, like it's just like observing what's happening. And then the debate itself is quite nuanced. You know, like some people are very happy that this is a start, you know, like that, you know, they're getting to like celebrate their history, but some people are really pissed off. They're saying this is an insult. You know, it's like such a fraction of the thousands of objects they've stolen, you know, like, and then there's other people who come in and say, well, actually, should we even be celebrating a museum in the first place? This is a colonialist idea to put these objects on display. You know, these are objects of worship. They should be among the people. They should be toured around the country, you know, and then people are asking, well, actually, how do poor people who can't afford to go to museums get to these? So it's like, it's really, over a short period of time, it really asks a lot of questions. And that debate, usually when a debate happens in a film or people start speechifying, a film sort of gets quite static, but actually it's edited in such a beautiful way that it just shoots along. Like we jump along from idea to idea in such a kind of fluid way. It's like really well put together. And then you have this really other interesting wrinkle on top of it, which is this voiceover, this kind of pomorphization of this statue of like the previous king of Dahomey, who, I don't know what to make of this. Actually, his voiceover is so poetic and so strange. Actually, it's like almost like sci-fi. His voice, first of all, is like has this kind of reverb on it, which feels like he's speaking to us from the depths of the earth or something. It's like so kind of like creepy and like. But then he's like. And initially you think he's like a malevolent figure, you know, he's like, seems quite angry that he's been brought to France and like, you know, like stolen from his country. But then when he gets back to his homeland, he feels a bit out of time, because he's been like, you know, he doesn't recognize the place because it's so different. So and then there's like a beautiful end sequence where he kind of just goes in a wander, you know, like the lights go off at the museum, like everything goes dark, and then he just seems to like go on a wander through town, like along the beach, and he's bringing up all these ideas of slavery and sort of like the dark periods of like, you know, Africa being plundered, but also like suggesting that, you know, there's a suggestion that Africa's a changed place, and he goes through the kind of nightclubs and kind of like you get the sense of the street life. So yeah, it's like it's hard to sense what Mata Diop thinks of all this. You know, it's like it's one of these films where like actually it's great to watch with people and debate all the kind of ideas that are happening within it.
I'd have loved to have seen it in a cinema as well, because as you say, like there's this great gravelly voice of the statue, but as far as I remember, like when we begin to hear that voice, it's always in darkness because it's implying that he's inside the crate or whatever. And, you know, his voiceover is completely separate from the scenes in which the artifacts are removed from the crate. So I can only imagine if being sat in like a dark auditorium with like no stimulus on screen, just a complete blackness, and hearing this voice must have been really, really impactful. So it has this great flourish, but you're right, it manages to at the same time like bring up a lot of ideas and ask a lot of questions.
And did you see Atlantics, which was Matty Diop's like feature? Her feature.
I've
So
not.
she's usually a feature filmmaker. She's made like a lot of shorts, and like she made Atlantics from a few years ago, which is one of these films that actually got lost a little bit because it was bought by Netflix and just kind of disappeared. But it brings up similar things. It's the idea of like people. It's the idea of ghosts and like what happens when people die, and like it's about people moving from like Africa to Europe, and like basically migrants, and what happens to the people who like perish on the journey. And it's got the same kind of haunting quality. She seems to be like this kind of dream space, between the living and the dead. It's like a very kind of interesting space to play with, and it's also got like even just like the font of the film is like amazing. It's got like this is Brat Summer before Brat Summer. It's this kind of lime green like look, and it's like it's so unusual for like a documentary about art to have this kind of weird, lurid kind of sci-fi font. So yeah, she's doing a lot of things. A really unique filmmaker with like a really interesting sort of perspective on things. And yeah, I suspect that her feeling about the whole thing is probably the statue's feeling. She's kind of angry about it, but like sort of like she's really cool.
Yeah. What would you? Are we letterboxing it?
We could letterbox it. I'd say this is definitely worth seeing. Like even though it's a 68-minute film, there's so much in there. It's probably worth going to the cinema to see it. And I think in the cinema you'll really get that sound, because the sound design is amazing. Like just even the movement of the boxes and the tying of the knots for the kind of statue to keep them in place. Yeah, I would see this in cinema if you can. Probably for doing things that I have never seen before, I would give it a 4.5. I think it's a really interesting film, and I can see it's a surprise that it won Berlin, but I can see why. It's a film that's really kind of playing with form and doing really interesting things.
Yeah, I would give it a 4. I think that it was intensely stylish and really, really informative, and just sort of like I say, like went in with no sort of awareness of the topic, but like came out with this like very nuanced understanding of it. So I think that it's a completely successful documentary. And
then we're going to talk about also Mark Cousins, which is another really idiosyncratic work. It celebrates the work of the Scottish modernist painter Wilhelmina Barns-Graham, who is part of the St Ives School of Art, but perhaps isn't as well known as our contemporaries. So like people like Ben Nicholson and Barbara Hepworth were much celebrated, but it feels like certainly that's Cousins' argument that Barns-Graham maybe didn't get her due. So the film is like Cousins making that case that Barns-Graham was, just as great as these artists. And he uses various techniques to do that. So he uses voiceover, which we're very familiar with from Mark Cousins' films. He uses montage of her art. There's kind of interviews in there. There's archive. He even kind of recreates like a moment in her life, which is quite interesting, one of the episodes. He's got lots of ways to explore the way she thinks as a person. And the film kind of focuses on an important event in her life. It was a visit to the Grinwald Glacier in Switzerland, an experience which Cousin argues kind of transformed the way she saw the world. Ellie, what do you think of this one?
I also had a great time. Like I say, it has like a real similarity with Dahomey, where it's quite an experimental take on it, quite a highly personal take as well. Like I'm aware that Mark Cousins does these sort of personal sort of profiles of individuals in documentary, which I've actually not seen, like the one on Alfred Hitchcock, like I actually didn't see that. But it was really just an interesting experience watching the very specific relationship between him and Wilhelmina develop. We see he acquires one of her paintings. He goes on this quest about like the doubts of its authenticity, and it's about his personal feelings that of panic that he might not have like an authentic one. He gets a tattoo at one point where we see him getting the tattoo of some of her art. So yeah, like Dahomey, the documentarian definitely has a role within this film, and also a sense that like we don't necessarily know what we're going to be covering until we cover it. Like Dahomey, the audience are also invited to use their imagination to kind of fill in the gaps. So like you say, he kind of points out that Willie, as she's known, is like a sort of terribly overlooked artist. So we're shown, whilst we're shown the huge amount of what she created, his sort of like voiceover is asking like, what was she feeling? What was she happy about? What was she unhappy about? how did this glacier like impact her painting? How did it, like, why did this particular event form so much of her artwork? So it becomes this really thorough exploration of this one artist's work. And it reminded me a lot of All the Beauty and the Bloodshed, in the sense that if you've got a really strong artist and you kind of just use a documentary to exhibit them, that can sometimes, you know, create this incredible atmosphere. It's very quiet and contemplative. It's really, really satisfying. It almost feels like you're in there in a gallery with just sort of how we, I don't know, get like as clear a picture as possible. I really like it. It goes grand. It goes in across her entire life story, but it also goes into the sort of micro of it all. It explores the sort of like very specific mathematical geometry she applied to get the color balance in her paintings. And then on top of it, like the readings by like Tilda Swinton kind of blend really, really well with Cousin's narration. So it almost feels like they're in dialogue together.
He's like the narrator, but she will read Willie's like diary entries and things like that.
But at the same time, like sometimes you get testimonies from people who knew Willie, and it's like there's the slightest, like, I don't know, like it all sort of blends well quite nicely together. You get like a sort of full spectrum of this person. So yeah, like I really enjoyed it, and again, really learned a lot. So 2 really strong documentaries to me that were quite inventive and sort of felt like a filmmaker themselves embarking on a journey and just capturing whatever would happen, for better or for worse. And yeah, just a really interesting process, I think.
Yeah, I think I was saying on the last podcast how like music documentaries are pretty rote and can be like the same, like samey. And I think the same is true for like artist profiles. You know, like think of all those kind of like BBC4 documentaries. You know, you've got like Andrew Graham Dixon or some kind of stuffy academic like saying this is, you know, like being very kind of like making art sort of feel like it's not immediate, you know? Like I think Mark Cousins is quite good at making this art feel very easy to comprehend. You know, he's got quite a poetic way of talking, but also quite a straightforward way of talking. You know, when he talks about the art, it doesn't feel kind of out of reach. You know, I think he explains the art or how he feels about the art in a very kind of lucid way, in a very poetic way. I also love how he starts the film like showing like pictures of like Willie, like, you know, she's wearing like an old Mac and like she's got her hair and like up because it's the rain, and you know, she's wearing like a scarf. She looks just like any old lady you'd see on the street. And he's like, his question is like, so why do you assume this old lady is not a genius? You know, like he is like sort of, it's quite a film that's essentially saying like, you know, we're an ageist society, you know, like this woman was making great art right into her 80s, but wasn't probably appreciated. I've actually heard a documentary with her speaking where she said that because her name was Willie, she kind of played with it, like her nickname was Willie. She played with that, so she liked people to think that maybe she was a man, and and because of that she kept in the background, because she feels like her art, she felt, was kind of quite masculine in a way, because her art is like very kind of bold, abstract. I think Cousins compares it to Mark Rothko, which is a good example. Like these kind of bold shapes and colours. You know, it's like she's not like into like the fine detail. She's making these kind of grand landscapes, even though she worked in quite small canvases. I think like her ideas are big, and that was really interesting. Yeah, and I love how like he's quite good at getting in the head of people. You know, like he spends a lot of time talking about how she sees the world, and like this, you know, she had I can't remember if she was ever diagnosed with it, but I think she was believed to have had synesthesia, which is like that kind of, it's a kind of quirk of the brain where you associate one thing with another. So in her case, it's colour with all sorts of things. So if like letters, for example, each letter has a different colour, and we see like all her notebooks where
she's got like a cryptogram, and like translates words into paintings.
And then she takes that and makes these little, like these amazing little grid paintings, you know, where she'll turn like a poem or something into like a grid, and she'll make art out of like words and sort of images. So really interesting. And I think he made clear she had like an obsession, you know, like when you look at those notebooks and there's hundreds and hundreds of these little tiny drawings using like a grid system, you know, that's an obsessive compulsive person. And then when she goes to this Grindwall glacier, you know, she doesn't do just like a handful of paintings or like enough for an exhibition. She makes dozens and dozens, and he does a montage of all of them together.
It's like a 20-minute montage. It's not 20 minutes, but it's like a really long montage right in the middle of the film where like the narration steps back and we stop cutting away to different things. It is just one picture after another inspired by this glacier, like from the I think starting with the late 50s, maybe 60s. We see the 70s, we see the 80s, and it's the same color scheme every time. And it's the same kind of, like, it is kind of incredible just receiving that much information at once that makes you realize how there is like a really cohesive idea behind her artwork. But at the same time, there are infinite differences between each individual painting. And it is this sort of like strange question that Cousins is left with of like, why has this glacier just stuck as a touch point of her art for her entire life? But I mean, at the same time, like, I don't know, like that's sort of, I think, one of those unknowable things. That's why he's so desperate to kind of get in her head, because we do not have the full picture. We will never really be able to interview her in the way that he would have liked.
Yeah. No, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think Cousins is kind of an interesting guy because he's actually, I mean, although he makes films about kind of famous people as well, he's always an advocate, I think, for the underdog. You know, so like even though he's made that Hitchcock film, for example, I do like that film, but what he does is show a lot of Hitchcock films you won't have seen. So like, he's talks about Hitchcock's life through his films, but he doesn't focus on like North by Northwest or Psycho. Or he actually goes into the kind of more obscure ones. He does the same with Orson Welles. You know, like he doesn't. I think he barely talks about Citizen Kane when he talks about Orson Welles. He focuses in more on his late, like weird ones, like The Trial and things like that. So he's certainly a filmmaker who likes to shine a light on people, and I think the fact that he's clearly got an affinity with this artist, you know, and the fact that he's kind of angry, I think, that she's not better well known. I think that's partly why he's made the film.
It is a really nice little run on for the podcast, at least. That last episode we were doing a documentary about women who have been overlooked in the Scottish music scene because of misogyny, and now we're doing this documentary which is about a really, really prolific female artist who has probably been overlooked or outright erased because of misogyny.
Exactly.
So it's been a good couple of weeks for documentary. It's been really, like, I don't know, bringing a lot to the surface that needs to be brought up.
And actually, I mean, I believe her archive is in Edinburgh, so like, I don't know if maybe there'll be an exhibition off the back of this.
I should hope so. I should hope this like inspires, because you see in the documentary as well that like near the end of her life, like didn't she have like an exhibition in Orkney or something like that? Like,
yeah,
she became celebrated because she lived in St. Ives as kind of like a St. Ives artist.
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't want to labour. She was definitely not totally unknown. Like,
sure.
she like, and like people like David Bowie had her art. I think I don't know if he says that in the film.
Yeah, he bought one of hers, and it was like this one was bought by David Bowie and stuff like that.
So she definitely had her fans, and obviously Cousins.
But you'd hope that this documentary might inspire some sort of renaissance, that we could maybe see an exhibition sometime soon in Edinburgh or Glasgow.
Yeah, and just the fact we're in Scotland here, like I hadn't, like, probably my shame for being like not known enough, but I hadn't heard of her. You know, I can't remember seeing
I think
her
I'd
work.
heard the name because it's such a beautiful name.
Yeah.
Wilhelmina Barns-Graham.
Yeah.
It's such an iconic name. I feel like I must have seen it written down somewhere.
And I believe some of her work's in like, and you can see it in Edinburgh and Modern One, I think, because they've got some of her works. So you can find it, and I'm sure it's like in other galleries around the world. But yeah, she's definitely one. I would love to see like all these. I would love like the experience of that montage, but in real life, you know, to be able to see.
Like, this is the thing that I think sometimes film can do a better job of letting you understand an artist and their art better than like the systems that we currently have in place, which is that they'll be scattered around different museums, and you'll be lucky enough
collections as well.
Yeah, if you can see one or the other, or maybe if there's an exhibition in town. Like, films are, at least they encode information and they're long lasting, and they can be accessed sometimes in more ways than just going to see the actual. Obviously you should go and see actual paintings, but like films themselves can put them together in a really interesting way, and really, like, I don't know, like finalize the narrative of an artist's life.
Cool. So should we do Letterboxd ratings?
Sure. I would also give this one 4 stars. I watched them back to back, this with Dahomey, and I honestly was like so pleased. 2 great documentaries.
Yeah, maybe this should be a good double bill.
Yeah.
Like, I think this is great as well. One of I really like Mark's work, but I think he's maybe getting better as a filmmaker. He's sort of like I love, because like the ones I've connected with have all been the cinema ones, but the fact he's going off and doing a film about an artist who I hadn't heard of, the fact I still connect with it is like very impressive. So yeah, 4 for me as well. So yeah, really good. So A Sudden Glimpse to Deeper Things is out this Friday from Conic, and Dahomey is out the week later on the 26th of October from Mubi. Definitely try and see these. I know they're both playing at Glasgow Film Theatre. I'm sure, I know Mark Cousins is also in a tour with film, so you might get a chance to see a Q&A with him, which is always good chat. He's a very lively Q&A subject. So yeah, look out for that. And I believe Dahomey will probably be in Mubi very soon as well. So as Ellie mentioned, Tilda Swinton provides one of the voiceovers in A Sudden Glimpse to Deeper Things. And she also has a new film out very soon called The Room Next Door, which stars her, Julianne Moore, and is directed by Pedro Almodóvar. So we thought, with these two films coming out very soon, it would be a good chance to talk about the enigma that is Tilda Swinton, who is such a unique position in the world of cinema. Where she is this kind of Oscar-winning actor. She's in Marvel films. She's completely part of the Hollywood mainstream. But at the same time, she has all these other tiny art house projects going on. She'll appear, in the most underground experimental movie and be brilliant in them. And then the next minute, she's in like a Coen Brothers film or a Wes Anderson movie. So she's a one-off, really. I can't think of anyone quite like her. Ellie, what do you make of her?
I love Tilda Swinton. I always think that like something that like really, really good actors can do that I feel like I, as someone who doesn't know how to act, couldn't do is like you have to have a really keen sense of like what you look like and how you appear and how you come across. And the example that I always give is like David Bradley. Like David Bradley does lots of different roles and appears in loads of different things, but he just knows he looks like a crotchety old man and he'll always sort of steer into that. And it's the same with Tilda Swinton. She knows how otherworldly she looks. And she sort of steers into those roles. But that's not to say that she's typecast, right? Because she appears in like, you're right, like We Need to Talk About Kevin is a film where she sort of plays like a mother who is a deeply flawed person, but kind of an ordinary person who is accessible, believable, and just completely unprepared kind of for the level of violence that everyday life can contain. But I recently rewatched Jim Jarmusch's Only Lovers Left Alive from, I can't remember when, 2013 or something like that, 2014, which I always thought it might have been like, I can't even remember how old I must have been the first time I saw it, but I always think of it as like a perfect Tilda Swinton role. Just, it's possibly the least action-packed vampire film, right? It depicts vampires as just sort of like pretentious, brooding, moody shut-ins who don't really do anything. Tilda Swinton is great in it. She's like lazing around in these beautiful clothes with this like big shock of platinum hair, sort of surrounded by books everywhere. And even early in the film, like when you don't fully understand like what's going on or like exactly how the film's going to play out, she's like walking through late night Tangier to get some blood or whatever. And she looks so sort of like small and out of place, but she's not stalking. She's not prowling. She's not like animalistic or villainous. She's not, a vampire. She just does seem to be on a slightly different wavelength than other people. But even just by like pretending she's ordinary, she comes across as incredibly extraordinary. So I don't know, like just has this very striking like visual presence and also capable of like working at this dissonance of like of who she is. I felt like she was a great pick we talked about David Bowie earlier in this episode, but like she appears in one of his music videos in The Stars Are Out Tonight, which is from The Next Day, which was his penultimate album. She and Bowie play like a completely normal, middle-class, middle-aged, married couple who are just going about their business, but they're being stalked by famous people. So the stars in this one kind of like want to steal what ordinary people have. And it's obviously just a music video role. So you could argue that there's maybe more modeling involved than there is acting, but it is just one of those really interesting ones where she's sort of getting to play it not being Tilda Swinton, kind of like how David Bowie gets to play it not being David Bowie, just a regular old like housewife or house husband. But it's just that it's these two people that are in the role that's what's so weird about it. And just, like a really striking performer who just kind of like is so fun to watch, like when she appears in Marvel films, or I think she was recently in like Asteroid City and stuff like that as the scientist, and it's like just so fun, She gave an interview with the Guardian a couple of years back saying that she was considering retiring from acting and switching to a full-time career in caring based on her experiences during the AIDS crisis, which I just love that. I love that like she doesn't really give a shit about the kind of fame that her sort of acting career has given her. And even though since that interview, she's done these roles like Asteroid City and she was the voice of death in Del Toro's Pinocchio, I still think it would be incredibly fun if you were like being wheeled to theatre and the person wheeling your wheelchair was like Tilda Swinton.
No, she's like a complete one-off, an amazing career. What I love is like she's like almost a meme at this point. Like you see people on like Saturday Night Live or like late night TV shows in America make fun of the fact that she's such this kind of weird presence. So she's like super famous. Like people like who don't know arty film know who Tilda Swinton are. Like if you showed her a picture, most people would recognize her.
She was in like the Narnia films like 10 years
exactly.
ago.
She's super famous, but she also never plays the same person twice. So she's got a kind of star persona of this kind of weird, arty, otherworldly enigma. But she never actually plays that in film. She's just a great character actor because she embodies different characters. So she was like had this career where she would work with Derek Jarman. I always think she's like maybe an actor who's just got great taste in filmmakers. She just knows the right filmmakers to work with. So she worked with Jarman for years. Like she was like his muse. She worked with Sally Potter, these kind of British art house films, and then she starts working with people like Jim Jarmusch, who's still in the kind of art house indie sphere. But she's also working like early Luca Guadagnino films as well. She's like
she was in Suspiria.
She's in Suspiria, but she's in even earlier ones where she's actually acting in Italian. So she's like never played the same character twice. She's like one of these rare actors who can be super famous and a big star, but actually is still allowed to be a character actor, which is kind of rare. Like I love her career, and I love like that she's worked with like she works with like very established filmmakers, Almodóvar, for example. But she'll also work with like brand new filmmakers. She's made a new film with Julio Torres, which is great in. One of my favorite of her roles, actually, she's actually really good at working. I notice actually quite often when like great foreign auteurs make their first English language film, she's like first at the door. She must like her agent or her. Yeah. She's just great at like gravitate. So like I think one of her great roles is in Snowpiercer, the Bong Joon-ho film.
Yeah,
where she's essentially like a kind of like she's almost like a Margaret Thatcher figure. She's this kind of like Yorkshire school teacherish type person who's like evil, she's like in charge. She does the administration essentially, and in sort of the logistics of this kind of like horrible dystopian train. She's like kind of like in charge of like the misery, and she's great at it. She can really captures that character. Even though she's like dressed up with ridiculous teeth and makeup, she like really creates a really vivid, memorable character. She's great at doing accents. She loves like just disappearing into roles. She'll be American, British. Like I say, she like learns Italian to be in a Luca Guadagnino film. She was recently, so she'll do these kind of big, broad things, like big comedies, even like with the Wes Anderson. But then she'll go and make something like Memoria, which is with the Thai filmmaker Apichatpong Weerasethakul. That's his first English language film, although it's set in Colombia. And she's in that film. She's speaking Spanish, but it's much quieter. She can do that kind of nuanced, quiet thing. She can be daft and silly. She's kind of quite amazing at that. And then I really loved her actually talking about the Julio Torres film, The Problemista. She's so good in that film. Again, she's playing. I think she's playing a Mancunian art critic. I was trying to remember exactly what she is. She's like our collector. Anyway, she's an art critic who starts to like date an artist, and it's about her relationship with Julio Torres, who's her assistant, and she's very abusive but also very sweet. She just brings so much to quite small roles. She can have a small cameo in a Wes Anderson film or a Coen Brother film and be very memorable. But then she can also kind of like be the lead and like the who directed The Souvenir.
Oh,
Joanna Hogg.
I thought you were going to say. I thought you were going to say Orlando, because Sally Potter's Orlando.
Yeah,
and she's in that, and she has this very like strong leading presence, but at the same time, it deals with this kind of duality that's iconic to Orlando that she, I think, upholds throughout her career. This sort of strange androgyny, this otherworldliness that she is kind of her trademark. Yeah. But at the same time, sometimes she's just, I don't know, like the fucking kung fu lady from the Avengers.
Yeah. And also it's interesting talking about Mark Cousins, because her and him made this kind of weird pilgrimage a few years ago where she like they
recorded the Highlands as they like drove through it or something.
No, what they did is they dragged a lorry with a cinema in it and would take it to like various villages and scenic spots across the Highlands and would show movies like to like the people who were following them on. So like that kind of idea of cinema being really important. She's done a few of those kind of projects with Mark Cousins, which are kind of very kind of cinephilic. So she's a total cinephile. She used to be like a patron of Edinburgh Film Festival as well. So she's very invested in cinema. and the kind of kind of how important it is. And I think that's reflected in her choices. The fact that she'll go and make a big movie. She can probably be in like Hollywood movies all the time, but she chooses to do that and then go and make a tiny film with a new filmmaker, or a filmmaker who hasn't broken out in sort of like Western territories yet. And she's using her kind of star persona and star power to find these really interesting roles.
She also considers herself Scottish, having not being born here, but having she lives here now, I think, and
believe she went to school here as well.
And perhaps that's why she got involved with Lynn Ramsay. Perhaps she wanted to champion, because she is very proud of her Scottish heritage. She's very pro-Scottish independence, and it's wow, Tilda Swinton really loves Scotland. I feel like we should reciprocate.
I wish she would make a Scottish film though. She has made a few. She's she's in Young Adam, for example, with Dave Mackenzie, but she should make more, because she just lives up in Nairn. That's also another cool thing. She doesn't live in Hollywood or New York or London. She lives in Nairn.
Yeah.
Who lives in Nairn? No one.
And she's just full of these sort of idiosyncrasies.
Yeah.
Like how I've also been reading about Tilda Swinton in preparation for this. She was, within a very close span of time, school friends with Princess Diana, and also a member of the Scottish Socialist Party.
Yeah.
So it's wonderful little sort of dichotomy there.
Yeah, no, she's she's one of the people who can cross class barriers. She can play anyone. She's so talented. Yeah, and I'm very happy to claim her as Scottish. If she believes she's Scottish, she's lived here a long time. She's Scottish.
Yeah.
So we love Tilda on the pod, and we're always happy to see her new film.
Yeah.
So if you want to see her new film, actually, you should see The Room Next Door, which is out the 25th of October from Warner Brothers. Actually, it's one of these films where, have you seen the trailer for this yet?
I've seen the trailer.
Yeah, it's one of these trailers where you don't know.
I have no idea what's going on.
It
could just be a vibe film where it's just them, but I don't know, especially after seeing Julianne Moore in May December, I was sort of getting vibes of the kind of sort of unhinged domesticity of that, so maybe it'll be quite thrilling. I'm quite looking forward to it.
It also won Venice, so it's also if you want to do a double bill of award winners, you've got the Berlin and the Venice winner out on the same day. So Dahomey and The Room Next Door out on the same day. Be a great double bill. That's all we've got time for today on the podcast. Hopefully that was fun. Was it fun for you, Ellie?
It's fun for me, yeah.
It's great.
It's unbelievable that we're always the two that sort of last the longest. It's not the first time that we've had to co-host just the two of us.
I know. Well, this last time it was an emergency, but this time it just happened that way. So, but don't worry, Anahit and Peter will be back next time. We're getting actually towards the end of the year. We're going to be doing a lot of end of year roundup. So there's going to be some fun episodes coming up. So, but this is, these are the kind of more serious movies, the kind of documentaries, but I think worth checking out.
Yeah.
Also Megalopolis. We're a very kind of broad church here. We do everything. So yeah, please come to our screenings when they happen next month. And we've nothing else to say really, but goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.